Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you and also have the opportunity to present some of the consumer analysis findings that we have researched within the VALUMICS project. My name is Arlind Xhelili, and I represent the team, the VALUMICS team from the Collaborating Center on Sustainable Consumption and Production, a Think and Do tank based in Wuppertal, Germany, while also acknowledging the contribution of the rest of the VALUMICS partner in this bulk of study. So I would like to start this presentation by highlighting once again what an important element of our lives food is. And as such, we jointly as a society have worked greatly towards improving the quality and diversity of food products available to us, and by default also improve our living and health standards, as well as our overall welfare. However, as we all know, there's a bit of a road ahead of us and some further opportunities of improvements, especially in the context of making our food consumption behaviors a bit more sustainable as well as healthier. And on basis of this, this is where I will focus in this presentation. I'll try to showcase what an effective transition towards more sustainable and healthier food consumption could look like, and how can consumer and behavioral insights support such transition. However, before proceeding, I would like to bring forward an important point, that is that within this bulk of work, we have taken as basis the Eat Lancet Commission report and understanding of sustainable and healthy food consumption. That is, the report states that in order for our global populations to be sustainable and healthy by 2050, the global consumption of fruits, vegetables, nuts, and legumes should double, while the consumption of foods such as red meat and sugar should fall by more than 50%. In this context, so in order to transition towards more sustainable and healthy food consumption behaviors, it is crucial, and also by default achieve this much needed consumer change or change at the consumer level. It is crucial to better understand the context and motivations, capabilities of consumer behavior, as well as how all of these connect to the rest of the value chain parameters. And this is what we have been trying to do within the VALUMICS consumer research analysis. So firstly, we have tried to really understand consumers' consumption and patterns, and from there on try to support the food actors in designing better actions, as well as by default then support this much needed transition. So now I'll just move on into the bulk of the research, so the different parts. On basis of a very in-depth desktop or literature review, as well as focus groups in 5 European countries, the first part of the research stream within the consumer analysis context focused on bringing forward a collection of insights and evidence on why European consumers buy food the way they do. And this analysis had two main angles, a very general one, just focusing on the general consumption patterns, but then a more product-specific one, generally the products that have been the focus of the VALUMICS project. And here, as a reminder, once again, in this slide, so we have beef, dairy, salmon, tomato, and bread. And what do the findings of this part of the research tell us? They tell us that food consumption comes as a result of a combination of drivers, indicating a very complex set of behaviors. However, at the same time, it is also possible to identify the drivers that influence our consumer choices or our consumption patterns. In this context, price been identified as the key driver of behavioral patterns. However, this does not necessarily mean that consumers by default are driven by the cheapest price, but it means that, for example, in those cases where consumers associate an increased value with a particular product, then this increased associated value also correlates with an increased willingness to purchase more expensive products. So depending on the value, depending on the value associated to a product, consumers will change their behavior. However, still price is a key behavioral determinant. Then the social context, whether it's norms, peer values, peer pressure, or generally patterns, as well as the individual or family habit, have been identified as another set of important behavioral determinants. Just to showcase this, for example, the eating patterns of a family or a household, like a member a member of a family, let's say the parent or the children, can influence the entire eating patterns of that household or family. The findings also showcase that health was identified as playing an increasingly important role in shaping food consumption behaviors. However, depending on the context and people's motivations, health can also act both as an opportunity and as a barrier towards more sustainable food consumption. An important finding is that environmental awareness exists. However, it is not at the top of consumers' list, as other factors as listed here seem to take precedence over environmental awareness. And to cap it, sustainability trends are developing over time, including here vegetarianism, veganism, local food consumption, or slow food movements. However, their impact on the mainstream food industry is quite limited. Therefore, it is important to find ways to boost their scalability. As highlighted, food consumption is relatively a complex group of behaviors, and this complexity emerges from the interplay between individual, social, and contextual factors that can all influence and shape our consumption choices. Nonetheless, at the very same time, a large degree of the action plans or the strategies out there, whether they're policy or market-based, focus a lot on providing information or awareness raising at the consumer level. And as such, and all of these strategies are mainly inspired by the central premise that consumers are perfectly rational, they are calculative, and they're optimizing. And of course, as beneficial as these action plans have been, they also, to a certain degree, they do not take into account consumers' actual reality and decision-making processes behind. And therefore, so far, they have exhibited only a relative degree of effectiveness. Therefore, it is important to turn towards another alternative and more realistic understanding of consumer behaviors. That is that people are subject of limited rationality and also incapable of perfectly understanding all elements of a certain situation, as well as given implications of that kind of situation. And as such, motivated by this kind of findings and understanding, the second part of the research within the consumer analysis focused on behavioral insights. Behavioral insights provide this more realistic, this more alternative, as also a much more evidence-based approach on why people behave and how people behave, as well as trying to better understand the cognitive processes behind people's decision-making processes. And in this slide here, I have showcased the outcome of this research. And of course, when planning this presentation, I didn't know that I'll have so much time, but still, it's only there for your consideration. And at this moment, I'll focus only on 2 examples of the outcome just for showcasing purposes. And of course, I would like to invite you to later on check the reports and the research out of it for more information. I'll focus on simplifying information because I would like to connect it with this inability of consumers to process all information that we provide to them in order for them to make a certain decision. And since people generally are unable to process all of this information, we think based on behavioral insight that it is much better to approach consumers only with a selected set of information, more targeted, and then avoid overloading them. And this is quite true for when it comes, for example, to labels and to the various campaigns out there. So maybe we just need to change a bit our strategy and provide a bit more targeted information to people and to consumers. The other example that I would like to highlight is about changing the default option, because this is inspired by people's tendency to go with the status quo. Basically, we as people we don't like so much change, and therefore we tend to follow the default options that have been provided by us, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. And making the sustainable products the default one can hold a great potential towards increasing the share of sustainable food consumption out there. The third stream of the VALUMICS consumer analysis focused also on collecting empirical learnings from 3 behavior change case studies. These were conducted by our VALUMICS partner, REVE International. However, I'm sure that Jan will be sharing those insights and learning immediately in the next presentation. So I'll just invite you to stay tuned, and I'll abstain from including those insights here. So when it comes to sustainable food consumption in general and consumers' attitudes towards it, it is well observed this intention action gap, basically where consumers exhibit this pro-sustainability or pro-environmental attitudes. However, they fail to materialize those into practice. And the reasons for the intention action gap are multifold, and some of these could be easily linked to the information that I've just presented in the preceding slides. And the very same information could also be utilized and leveraged in order to overcome this intention gap. And on basis of this understanding, as well as the collective learnings of the previous research streams, as well as expert consultations, the fourth part of the research focused on providing a set of multi-stakeholder recommendations that aim at closing this gap, as well as to support the shift or the transition towards more sustainable food consumption behaviors. And with these recommendations, we try to adopt a very holistic and system-based approach. So basically to utilize a variety of mechanisms, tools, policy recommendations that can support the shift, as well as to try to influence consumers on multiple angles. And while looking at the recommendations as such, we realize that all of these have a certain common traits and characteristics, and they could be clustered under the framework that you can see in the slide here. And the main clusters that were identified were choice environment, choice expansion, choice editing, and beyond choice. In the next slide, I'll try to focus on what exactly each of these clusters means. However, again, for the sake of time, I'll not be able to go into detail on each recommendation and what do these entail. However, I would love and I would kindly invite you to have a read at the reports and see what these suggestions and ways forward look like. So choice environment brings together recommendations that aim at creating a favorable environment for sustainable food purchase to take place, often nudging consumers in a desired direction. So basically, this is all about the various interventions, policies that can modify and shape the point of purchase or the point of sale where consumers interact with the rest of the food system and try to utilize that point as a way of guiding consumers towards the universal, better, healthier, and more sustainable choices. Then we have choice expansion, which brings together recommendations that aim at increasing the number of sustainable options available, while keeping also the other conventional products available for consumers. And this is opposite to the other cluster of recommendations which look at choice editing. And in here, the recommendations look at reviewing and editing out the unsustainable and unhealthier food options. And we are quite aware that this is the type of recommendations that is very unconventional, that can generate a bit of a reaction, and are much more bolder. However, they also hold quite a potential, and maybe we just need to see and to explore if there is some sort of potential forward that we can utilize or leverage for the sustainable agenda in general. Then lastly, we have the recommendations within the Beyond Choice cluster. And this is all about those recommendations that aim to influence overall on the system, not on the point of purchase. However, these influences still hold the potential to increase and to make consumer choices much better and more sustainable. With this, I'm coming closer to the final bits and pieces of this presentation, where I would just like to make some final highlights. I think with this presentation, I tried to showcase that food consumption behaviors have such a transdisciplinary character. And whenever we try to influence those, it would be great to kind of acknowledge this character and also rely on measures that have a similar transdisciplinary approach as well. The recommendations that I just hinted at, they kind of acknowledge this recommendation and try to provide a system-based approach to changing it. As mentioned, they leverage a variety of tools and mechanisms, whether it's policy, whether it's business or market-oriented, whether it's just campaigns in general, and they try to influence consumer choices on those multiple angles. And for a much better result, we suggest that the recommendations should be seen in complementary to one another and reinforcing one another, as opposed to seeing them in silos. And then also, it is important to reinforce that it is necessary to reflect on consumers' reality, thinking, and behavioral patterns when designing any measures that are targeted towards them and towards changing their behaviors. As well as quite important, it is to bring consumers as an active participant in this discussion as opposed to passive one, because ultimately at the very end of the day, we're trying to design something that will impact them the most. And therefore, we could bring them into this conversation and give them a voice when trying to design and shaping the food frameworks. So I hope that with this presentation, at least I've made you curious about this piece of research. And if you'd like to learn more, please visit the VALUMICS project website and have a look at the VALUMICS publication set. You can see the cover of the report. And here I have provided a link to a video that basically is a more shortened version of this presentation that I gave and hints at the various aims of the reports. And of course, thank you very much for your attention. If you have any comments, questions, feedback, or any ideas of collaboration, please please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear and also continue the conversation together. Thank you.